is, what it was, what it shall be. We're back again. Today's video, Spirit War Boot Camp number 97, and it is called Memetic Martial Arts. How's everyone doing? I'm doing so great. Coming into springtime, finally. So anyway, let's talk about Memetic Martial Arts. What is that all about? Well, in the previous video, I've been trying to get across the concept of the white-pilled meme lord. And now we're going to transition this into memetic martial arts. And how do these things connect? What is a meme lord? First of all, it's someone who has a command of the memetic domain. Memetic domain is the domain of ideas and images. And since we're engaged in a meme war and the memetic martial arts, what we're doing is we're leveraging our knowledge of the memetic sciences, right? The transmission of information through tiny syntactic units called memes, right? In a way, brevity adds a lot to the power of memetics, right? The great thing about memetics is it can be a transceiver for not only ideology, but as well as emotional energy and attention, human attention and focus. It serves as kind of a condensation nuclei for what I'm calling the fabric and the building blocks of all reality, which is awareness, right? Human awareness. Memes attract awareness. And in a way, you could say they constellate awareness into a tiny composite multifunctional unit, ideally, right? So now, my argument, and I'm gonna get into some crazy shit. I hope people appreciate this one, but I'm gonna talk about something that I don't think anyone else has ever talked about. Okay, so as I was stating in the previous video, like I was saying how I'm a philosophical idealist, right? So my premise and my worldview that I operate on is the idea that through mastery of this idealistic domain, the domain of ideals, right? My argument and the argument of idealists in general is that this idealonic realm, right, is upstream of the material realm, right? So in other words, it's more important. It's primary, right? It comes first, right? And whereas the material world is slow and dense, right? The idealonic world, the world of ideas, the memetic domain, if you will, is highly fluid, right? And like I said, it's highly leveraged. So with minimum effort, you get maximum result, right? This is the advantage and this is the importance of the memetic domain, right? So right now I'm going to talk about modern technologies that have been leveraged on the memetic domain. Like everybody can know about radio. Like think about it, radio is really a pretty recent invention. We're talking a little over 100 years, right? It's as far as we know, right? It was a cultural novelty at the time when it came out. Let's just put it that way. It's something new to the people that experienced it. And that's a domain of memetics, right? But it gets deeper than that because these frequency bands and these electromagnetic bandwidths, if you will, that are in recent history increasingly being used, right? They have a lot of effects, right? They have not only material effects, but upstream effects that get into the memetic domain, right? So like I was pointing out, radio, in a sense, you could think of it as a form of brainwashing. It's a form of propaganda, information control, information, dominance, if you will, and propaganda, information warfare, right? Same thing applies to TV, but now we've got the visual domain. So not only is our auditory domain and our imaginative domain engaged, like with radio, now we have the visual domain of visual stimuli. And I don't know how many people know about the fact that you can alter people's genetics through light. It's called optogenetics. And there's lots of other physiological effects that can be promoted through light frequencies. And that's, of course, why everything's being gridified, right? Everything's being artificialized in order to control what they call data over power. Not only that, but like photonic data transmission. So that in essence, every person and their physical body and their consciousness becomes a vehicle and becomes a vessel and becomes a transceiver for this memetic and informational energy that we're not even consciously aware of, right? That's the thing with TV. Like you could be like, yuck, I don't like this, I'm turning it off, right? Same with radio. With light, it's not even passing through your verbal linguistic matrix at all. you're not assessing it for truth value in any way. So it proceeds deep into the subconscious with more or less no firewall and it gets even crazier. So now let's talk about V2K, or so-called voice to skull technology, right? So this is a form of coherent focused sound that can be projected selectively to an individual, right? Not only can it be projected like a normal wave through space, but it could also be transduced through the skull, right? So by placing a physical object of some kind in a close contact with the skull, like the skull instead of the eardrum and everything. So even you could use this on deaf people. Okay, that's how crazy it is. And so voice to skull technology basically is this is a very powerful weapon within the memetic domain, and it gains a lot of power due to the fact that the individual they don't understand its true source. So they may interpret it in a crazy way. Okay, so now let's layer this V2K and this, all band radio frequency transmission that exists, and layer those two things, and then layer the concept of blue beam, right? So the idea of creating a simulacrum, if you will, like an illusion with the intent to propagandize people. And especially so far, this has already been used many, many times on a lot of religious populations, right? And in different countries too, and primitive people, right? They've been selected as like the most susceptible to test this on, right? Okay, so now if you accept the premise that there is a such thing as a memetic domain of warfare, and you accept the premise that it's being used on us right now, of course, the next logical step is to be defense and offense. Like, how do we defend ourselves on this domain and subjugate, defeat, demoralize, marginalize, mitigate, and eliminate all adversarial opponents on this domain, right? Because this is what, to me, this is what I see as the appropriate response to that situation, right? It's not to just passively go along or be in denial of the reality, right? That's not good. So, but the next step of the phase is where I bring in the solution to that issue. Like, I'm trying to help and propagate. First step in the solution process is awareness of the problem, but you can't stop there, right? So we need techniques, tactics, and protocols. So the first step in building these things, in my opinion, is a strategic model, right? So you think of the physical body more or less as a transceiver for energy, not only on the photonic light plane, the physical vibration plane, thermal energy plane, magnetic energy plane, electrostatic energy. Like it's transducing all these different energy and informational bands, right? But it's also biological. So it is a technological artifact beyond our comprehension. It's a quantum computer, and it's a quantum transceiver, quantum radar, And this reality is, of course, hidden from us, because imagine a person who has no concept of that, and someone beams like a voice to skull at them or propagandizes them with religious propaganda about how the end of the world is great and how dying to protect the chosen ones is like very super awesome and ideal. And that's heroic, and that's, you want to imitate heroes like that. This is a form of memetic warfare that's being deployed, and it goes beyond just leaflets and religious cults, right? It goes way beyond that. But if you accept the premise that we are in this ideologic or this memetic reality, right? Like the substrate of our physical reality is ideological, and that we can change our own conceptions, right? We can strengthen our perceptions. We can focus our perceptions. So we have all these ways of mobilizing on this domain. And we can also cooperate. Perhaps most importantly, is that we can have a shared memetic arsenal, right? That we distribute and we delocalize, right? Unconventional asymmetric warfare, right? So part of that is you need a memetic syllabary, if you will, or a memetic lexicon, right? You need a trove of memes and you need shared memes, and you need a common understanding, just like in the army, how they teach you, like, you know, whiskey tango foxtrot, right? They teach you these communication ciphers that's shared amongst your group, and there's lots and lots of them, right? So this is something that analogous to that needs to be developed by us. And the great thing is there's already lots of raw material, right? Like there's lots of sigils, there's lots of symbols, there's lots of high level alchemical information already, and syntactic systems that are already out there. But what we need is, do we have a shared comprehension of this framework in order to do what I call memetic engineering. That's probably going to be the title of my next video, is memetic engineering. So in other words, we are adaptively constructing and building responsive memetic systems to engage in, you know, what they would call kinetic warfare. So to adapt and to overcome. So I'm just going to give a simple illustration of something about this, right? So if you believe that the memetic warfare is real, and you believe that the energetic domain of that conflict is also real, you need to have concepts of self-defense, right? So you need to be able to conceptualize and visualize your own physical body and the energy sheaths that surround it, and having these things adapt in a dynamic way, right? Like just think of something like, okay, if it's hot outside, you take off some clothes, or if it's cold, you add layers of clothes, or you change, you know, there's all kinds of things that we should change about our routines in the physical world due to external conditions, right? And so the same has to be true on this memetic domain, right? So like, let's say, for example, we're being bombarded with fear propaganda of like 100 different kinds and demoralization. So we need to develop an adaptive response to that, which is contrary. And what it does is it empowers the individual. It mobilizes us and shows the need for action in a certain given direction. And it unifies the efforts of the people, right, on a common goal. So this is kind of like the memetic counterinsurgency, if you will, right? Where we recognize that all of us have a common adversary who is utilizing overwhelming force and technological, you know, developments against us, and that we need to likewise combat that, to at least in a self-defensive type of method, right? So we need to conceptualize our body in such a way to understand its power, right, in an accurate way. We don't just think of ourselves as material beings and slaves that are trying to look like whatever is on Instagram or TikTok, right? We're not trying to compete with all those people about our physical bodies, or get nose jobs, or take Botox, or GLP, or whatever it is, the stupid nonsense pharmakeia that they're putting out there to kill and demoralize and stupefy everybody. Like, we don't do that. We strengthen our bodies on a higher causal plane beyond the physical, right? And so a lot of different groups have this ideology already, and they've already been teaching it, and I'm not going to go into that. But if you've heard the phrase light body before, right, or astral body, you've already heard about this topic. But it's just the formulations of what that means, how to do it, and so what the goals of that are, and so on, are different. Like in the school that I follow, you're supposed to develop 4 alternate bodies in addition to your normal body. Like, you're developing 4 other bodies for different things. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's easy to find this information if you're so interested. And then secondly, then there's this group called, well, there's this teacher, I'll say, or this writer called Samuel Aun Weor. And he talks about the solar body, and he calls himself a Gnostic, more or less Christian Gnostic or whatever. But he says there's this thing called the solar body. And as I've alluded to in previous videos, like, the conventional theory tells us that the sun is a massive ball of plasma, right? So that tells something about what the solar body would be. Light body too also is applicable, because obviously the sun produces a tremendous amount of light. So these things are somehow connected. We also know that the physical body generates biophotons. So there we can see that there is a materially grounded connection between our current physical form and this domain of light and photonic energy, right? just like the sun, and also plasma, since we do have microelectric currents flowing through our bodies, enabling a lot of our basic biological functions. So these things are all connected, okay? This is not just woo-woo. There's a material basis that demonstrates the link here. So what this teacher taught is that you need to build the solar body, okay? And again, this is very similar to what the Egyptians taught about the Ba and the Ka, and how death separates those two things. And they have, again, more souls beyond that. The basic souls of a human are 7, right? According to them. The Chinese also have a very similar concept, which they call the Po, which is the 7 earthly souls. And those souls generally do not carry our consciousness beyond death. They're all considered to be material, and they all return to the earth at the point of death. And they're tied up with the organ systems in the TCM model of how human physiology works. So, but then there's 3 higher souls, and the Egyptians have a similar thing. There's the Ba. Then there's something called the name, the highest name, the Ren. So there's multiple. And so how did they build that body? Let's look at the Egyptians, because that's probably the oldest teachings about this topic. How did they build a solar body, a light body, a Ka, whatever you want to say? Well, they use eidolonics, they use memetics, right? Same thing. So they would construct a template of their light body, right? Like a little statuette or a 3-dimensional relief carving into the wall, or even their structures, like the tombs and stuff like that. And what do they call them? The mastabas, and these different little pyramidal tombs and things, and even the sculpture of how those were proportioned and everything like that. All that revolves around sustaining, strengthening, amplifying the light body. And so this is why people like Albert Pike want to go build so-called House of the Temple, which is modeled on the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, which in essence is a piezoelectric resonator for the light for the light body that holds it alive, keeps it alive, keeps it coherent, and so forth, and allows travel not only within the earthly domain, but travel into other realms and dimensions and return to this origin point, right? So these guys were deep, okay? And I've told you already a couple ways that they're trying to build this body, but then you could get into what we call qigong or pranayama, right? So breath work, more or less, how to circulate breath energy and the static electricity, the ionic gases that we breathe, and the plasma energy can all be circulated through the body through this breathing cycle. And of course, this ties in also with our blood chemistry, like the oxygenation of the blood has all these different chemical effects, and it carries energy through the body, charge, static charge, magnetism, and so on. And so pranayama is a lot about regulating, the controlled regulation of these cycles for different effects. And this is another way that we can build our so-called solar body. Personally, I'm into taking a lot of mineral salts, like high amounts of ionic mineral salts, because that just builds the charge field of our body. Of course, the more you can ground out, everyone talks about that, grounding, but you can also come into physical contact with highly, shall we say, static and prana active life forms, and things like mountains, giant crystal formations. There's all kinds of ways to charge up your light body, your solar body. People might not believe the fact that you can project one of your sheaths, one of your body sheaths, and one of your energy bodies. You can project it out of the body to these various locations. So like if you know really potent power spots in different places on the earth, you can systematically learn to project your consciousness there to harvest energy. And I get that people might not believe that, but let's just say too, it doesn't take much digging to find these different telluric networks that have been built on the surface of the earth with these different structures and the alignments. Once you learn the sort of architectural vocabulary, because they're extremely consistent. That's one thing that I want to really point out and emphasize to people, is that the evil arcs and the so-called helites, or the elites of this world, like they're very systematic, okay? They're very, very consistent. So if you learn their MO, you learn their modus operandi, their tactics, techniques, and protocols, you're going to see it everywhere again and again. And you're going to be able to trace the enemy operations everywhere they go, right? And you're going to understand the physical sciences that give them and sustain their power, but you're also going to be able to avail yourselves of that same power. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I've been thinking about creating a paid tier because I have a lot of really in-depth information on all these topics that should really only be for serious students, because it is very high level. And really, in addition to having a paywall, I'm probably going to have to like test people, right, for acumen, not for any kind of moral anything like that, but for acumen. Are they capable to actually understand the subject matter? You know, furthermore, there's a trust bond involved because I don't want people just spreading all this information out, right, stealing my IP and stuff like that. But I have a lot of information about this, and most 90% of everything that I have is freely available. It's just that people either don't know about it, can't comprehend it, or don't have the proper knowledge matrix to integrate all this information. You know, people might find it paradoxical, but actually the most important qualification to anyone to really understand this information is a thorough grounding in the hard sciences. Chemistry, electrostatics is very important as well. Chemistry and physics, probably two most important. Botany be third, probably. Geology doesn't hurt either. These are all critical systems. All forms of mathematics, really, too, are of a supreme importance. And it's weird to me that most of the people that are in alternative spirituality or so-called New Age shit, they're completely illiterate in every single one of these topics, which is a shame because they've got the focus area correct. Like thinking about your soul, thinking about higher dimensions, thinking about time displacement, time travel, you know, like psychic communications. Like these are all the correct topics, but they have the inverted method. This is the typical divide and conquer. Everyone's putting so much energy to divide spirituality from science, because if you combine those two things, you're leveled up at a massive level. And of course, if you haven't noticed, this is precisely what I'm trying to achieve with the Spirit War series, is to fuse these two domains together. But anyway, coming back to our concept of memetic warfare, what if there's reality weapons? What if the recent statements by high-level government officials that there's weapons that can bend reality and time, reality weapons, time weapons, gravity weapons, what if all those exist? What if all those are already being deployed with a specific target of the human psyche to introduce foreign sensations, foreign memetics, foreign biological command systems, foreign metagenetic programming information? What if all these are being deployed at the same time? So today what I'm trying to focus on is the memetic aspect of this. So let's just put, you ever heard the phrase like, don't believe everything you think? Well, I'm going to add a corollary to that, which is not all your thoughts are your own. How do you tell the difference? And this is true even before all the technological shit was there. Like a lot of ancient lore about the so-called jinn, right, and evil spirits. Like in the Chinese, they have the same thing. Like they consider they have 7 emotions that they categorize, and all the emotions are pathogens. This is very similar to the Buddhist system, where they have the kleshas, and the Hindus same. They have the kleshas, which is called mental and emotional afflictions. I often refer to them as thought loops, right? Like all these need to be understood. Number one, you need to understand them, how they function. You need to be able to control them, not always suppress, eradicate, block, deny. That's not what you want. You want to process them. You want to convert them. And a lot of times in the Tantra, Buddhist Tantra, almost the entire system revolves around converting these mental and emotional afflictions into a power supply, right? And the key model of that is Padmasambhava, where he converted all the land spirits and opponents of the Dharma in the beginning. He converts them all and drafts them into become Dharma protectors, right? This is how a real strategist thinks. And the great thing about that kind of strategy is the enemy doesn't even have to be conscious of it. They don't even have to know that they're doing your bidding, right? And a lot of times is the case. They're called unwitting dupes or something like that, useful idiots or something. These are the words that people use. But yeah, these are concepts that you probably should get your mind around and try to understand. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious that this domain of conflict is it's engaged already right now. But what I'm trying to get to today is just inculcate the idea that you have a spiritual defense. You potentially can develop a memetic defense. Okay. And I know I'm always talking about Buddhism, but honestly, Buddhism is the single best psychic self-defense system ever created in the world. It is incredibly acute. It is incredibly powerful, and it's relatively easy to understand, right? And it doesn't require any dogmatism. It doesn't require even metaphysics, right? You don't have to believe in anything non-material to work with this system. What it's there to do is to give you mental clarity, right? For whatever objectives you've already formulated for yourself, this is the method that's going to produce for you extraordinary mental clarity and a high level of immunity to all forms of propaganda. But more importantly, it gives you sovereignty in the memetic domain, right? Because it teaches you the construction of eidolons or memetic thought forms, right? It teaches you the persistence in the construction of that, the refinement, the strengthening, and most importantly, the sharing of these types of thought forms, right? Take, for example, the concept that there's a lineage, right? So somewhere, some great faculty and skill and awareness was achieved by somebody in the past, right? What if they could transfer that to their student, and the student could not only absorb that, but build upon it, right? In the Buddhist lore, what they say is that when the master's physical body is exhausted, right, they don't cease to exist. Because they've spent decades of their lives building the light body. It's called Jalu in Tibetan. It's similar to the concept of a solar body, but it's another type of body that in which you can persist and still communicate and share info with your disciples, right? And the higher the disciples climb in their achievement, like the more information you can actually transfer between yourself and the masters, right? I know people probably don't believe that, whatever. I'm just saying this is an idea that could be helpful to you to try and think in such a way. Because if you conceptualize yourself as an immortal being with a non-physical component that's not subject to aging, sickness, and death or time, right? Your conception of your own capacity of thought and action can radically expand, and you could set a much higher bar for yourself, and you can have a positive motivational example that's going to basically give you a very clear concept of these higher levels that can be obtained, and to demonstrate it for you, to show you that it's real. Like, these are all very important things that are highly motivating, right? And it can propel our evolution to an incredibly great degree. And no system in the world has a total monopoly on this ability either. So you can search for information all over the world, and they have some, and that's what I do. Like, I don't just dogmatically ignore everything that's different from what I do. Like, I do the opposite. I try to learn from everybody. If I ever see anyone worldwide getting the results, no matter what their ideology is or what their physical bodies look like or whatever that is, like, that doesn't matter. Results matter. I'm a pragmatist, a supremely level pragmatist, right? And that's why I don't discriminate about all these other different things. Like, I'm like, what works, right? So like I'm saying, there's a massive trove of data and information and intelligence gathering that's already been done over thousands of years about all this information, right? So if you're walking down the street one day and you see a floating hologram of some kind of scripted reality there for you, are you going to have a defense system? What about your dreams? What if someone could project weaponized content into your dreams? I think this is a reality. I've had it happen multiple times. Psychic attack, if you will. So how would you defend against that? How could you create a sheath of energy that surrounds and protects you everywhere? How could you build physical structures that are going to serve as a optoacoustic resonating cavity to amplify and cohere your biophotonic signals and strengthen your solar body, your light?